it's up to your imagination essentially, but being on the spot. And then a third kind of soft outcome is our presentation skills and being able to be put on the spot, like, done, ready to go, here we go. And sum this all up in about 3 minutes. It's supposed to be short and succinct and help speaking good. Clearly I'm not, but to get us talking better, talking good, and being able to get the words out fast. Simple but accurate is what I want to go for. So those 3 outcomes, more or less. Does that kind of sound good with everyone? Again, it was just to get more group presentation going and get everyone a little bit more involved, so we're not just sitting here doing one of these the whole time. That actually, like, the randomness is going to be put on the spot, and then you get to talk a little bit and then go from there.
This means yes. This means no.
That's what I'm trying to get past. Is just the typical lesson format of just blank stares.
Yeah. Andrew, I'm just really glad you're practicing facilitating discussion.
Yes, that is where I'm going to try and go from that too, like clinic leading and setting this up and making my goals a little bit more clear as well. And yeah, that's what I want Jen to watch me, is my clinic leading ability, more or less, even though I'm kind of putting this on you guys. So before we even begin with that, are you guys okay with like just doing like a 3-minute randomly pick on you guys? If you feel completely uncomfortable, except for you, Bobby, you can say pass or.
Except for you, Bobby.
Bobby is not allowed to pass. Anyone else is more than welcome to, though.
Yeah, that was really funny. Sorry.
I would like to kind of see for you to do like a 3-minute demo of what you're expecting.
Absolutely. I'm definitely going to lead that and get us going from there and then see where it goes. Again, I'm going to do like a softball version of just a typical lesson, and then I'll set up like a later one of like a clinic leading session. So it'll make more sense once I say the first one, and then I'll pass it along to whoever and go from there. So I'll absolutely give a demo. And I'm ready whenever you guys are. I just wanted to make sure you guys are okay if I randomly call on you. Because the biggest part of this is the spontaneity and just kind of being ready to present. Cool. All right. So what I want to outline with the original scenario is skiers' level, what they're working on, and kind of their motivations. And that's where we'll take the lesson, and I'll give a little bit of a mock, like where I would go with it. And then I want to see the building and progression and the variety and go from there. So I was thinking we might start with Susie. She's a 10-year-old girl, about a level 60, 70. She has a bunch of older sisters that love racing and going fast. And she is a little more on the timid side, but she would love to catch up with her sisters. So 10-year-old Susie, level 6, 7, and we're going to start going over some racing techniques and get into the world of that so she can keep up with her sisters. So what I might try to do with her is work on some edging skills. And what I want to do with that is I'd start with carved uphill arcs, and I would really hone in on the edging skill ski fundamental. With the carved uphill arcs, we would get her tipping her legs and feeling the sensation of the edges cutting through the snow. And we can start to change her mindset from typically rotary-based movements of skidding the turns into now getting some performance out of it. And with the carved uphill arc, she would be able to be in a comfortable situation, nothing too crazy, and she'd be able to tip her legs and feel the edges slicing through the snow, getting a little performance out of them. So the next person I'm going to call on, I'm looking for, again, to stay with the same task or change the task as you see fit. You can build off it, make it harder, whatever else. And what fundamental is this tying into? And how does this tie into our motivations? So, Bobby, where would you go from here?
I'm gonna spark a raging debate and say a flat ski is faster than a tip ski going down the hill. So I would actually choose to work on something different. I guess I could work on the same thing. I think I'd want to go from a carved uphill arc into a pivot slip to see if she has the ability to flatten the ski, because as she's going down the hill with a flat ski, she will have a better time keeping up with her sisters. Look at that. Is that what you're looking for?
More about the fundamental. And I didn't do it myself, but body part specific.
So I'd want to work primarily on lower leg tipping, or in conjunction with the task that you just named, or the carved uphill arc. I'd want to work on once she's up the hill, flattening that ski to see if she can maintain a corridor and going down the hill, just so she can kind of feel the sensations between being on a carved or a tip ski and being on a flat ski going down the hill. Again, primarily with the function of moving, or primarily, by flattening the knee and the ankle, or untipping the knee and the ankle, and moving her center of mass down or over her new downhill ski, so that she can flatten onto it, or that she can untip the skis and flatten them. And from there, she can use that same sort of spectrum of movements between tip ski and flat ski in order to kind of play with the extremes of both ends. And again, kind of carved uphill arc and rolling pivot slip for that reason. Does that make sense?
I love it, yeah, because that, again, showcases the ability to tip her skis, still working on the same thing, those tipping. And then I would argue with that is just the flat ski as he goes faster. I'm trying to get like some rebound out of that ski, and that's what I'm looking for the performance on that one. But I love it.
Right. I think in my mind, the way that I like to think about this stuff is that if you can it's kind of like an elastic skill set. So if you have, in my mind, or skill sets can be elastic, is the more that you expand your comfort zone, or you expand your understanding of them by understanding the extremes of both ends, like how, like as tipped as you can be, say on a carved uphill arc versus doing pivot slips down the hill, is you're able to kind of combine or modify or play with the amount of blend that you use between those two movements in more functional skiing.
Sweet, love it. And then from here,
Hey, Andrew.
Yep.
Yeah. Can I add something? Just because I really like what Bobby said, but just to put a different spin on it, because I think you talked about modifying the task as well. And so I like carved uphill arcs for the reason you said. And if I were speaking to this 10-year-old girl, I would try to say it as simply as possible, is that, yeah, it's really important to know how to tip our skis with our lower legs, but it's really important to know how to untip them as well. So if I were modifying the task that you did, the carved uphill arcs, right? So we would have, and of course it's such a great visual tool, because when done right, we get to show them those two nice parallel arcs in the snow. So it's sort of established with her where the middle part of the turn is. And then I'd say, let's do this again. But as we get to the middle part of that turn, let's flatten our skis using our lower legs, as you talked about before. So we're going to start slipping down the hill. But then after a couple of seconds, let's re-engage our edges. Let's tip our legs back up into the hill and continue that arc uphill. Let's see if we can do that and get more of that kind of kinesthetic awareness, muscle memory going. Again, I like what Bobby said a lot, but just trying to keep it within the task you chose and modifying that task. That's how I try to go about that.
Awesome. And yeah, I'm just looking for like kind of the spider webbing. Again, we're using our imagination here, and just going for the creativity piece of being more familiar with the IDP. So you can, again, we can change it via speed, accuracy, or environment, or branch off to a whole nother task and go from there. So this is kind of how I envision this going. And then we'll do one more person with this scenario, and then we'll kind of up the stakes a little bit with the next one. So Donnie, where would you go from there? From those two people?
I would vary the task again using that pivot slip idea and the edging, and play with, because she's a little timid, she's probably a little insecure about going fast. So I would make sure that she could stop fast. So work on doing pivot slips that are really drawn out and doing high speed straight to how quickly can we stop using that pivot slip motion. Back to how fast and flat to twisted them right away and seeing how quickly we can stop.
Okay.
Building up that confidence for control, addressing that timid side.
Yeah, and which task would you do for that? You just have her go from like a straight run to a hockey stop, or?
Yeah, just drawing out pivot slips from, usually when we do pivot slips, we're doing them pretty tight, one right after the other. Get on a steep, long run and, pick up some real speed in between them, 100 feet between each one at least.
Nice. Getting comfortable with the speed.
Donnie,
And
can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So when you say you would vary the speed, is that during the slide or during the slip?
All of it.
And how would you vary the speed during the slip, and to what value would that be in one of her fundamentals?
In varying the task again and varying the slip idea, doing side slip races, and seeing how fast you can side slip. With a flatter ski. Like a fun place to do that is on Norwegian on an icy day, doing side slip races, and then tipping the skis up carefully, not too much, because if you tip up too much, and if you're not balanced right, you'll shoot somewhere. But just controlling that and be working on the edging skills, feathering that.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for clearing that up. I like it. How are you guys feeling with this format so far?
I think the format's good, and I was kind of thinking I'd jump in that my focus in staying with the steered arcs is I'd start to get more specific into the body mechanics and understanding to try to develop her understanding of what actually makes something tip over. It's an imbalance in either the pressure or the weight, however you want to think about that, and start to do that same task, but play with the rotation of the foot. So the movements below the knee, in the lower leg, the ankle, and the foot, and how that can direct pressure in the foot, so that if we make movements, I'm going to see if I can change this. If we make movements this way, the pressure is now gone out towards the little toe, and if we move movements this way, we've got more pressure on the big toe. And starting to understand that how we manipulate that can change whether we're directing more pressure on this edge or that edge. And through understanding that, how rotational movements in the body move the center of mass laterally, she'll get a better understanding of the fundamental of edging.
Awesome. Yeah, sounds like we're getting this girl tipped on her skis, and it sounds like she's gonna be catching up to her siblings in no time. I'm gonna call it for that scenario, just as kind of like a demo of going on. And then where I see this going next is I'm gonna set up more of a clinic leading style, and let's get two skiers in this one to try and relate some different skills. It'll get us brainstorming a bit more about the task. So I'm gonna create, Colleen, welcome. So I'm you're muted, but all good.
I just got off work.
No worries. I'll give you a minute to kind of fill in, like just watch other people as we're presenting a little bit.
Okay.
And I'm creating a scenario for everyone, and then you're going to branch off of that and give like where you direct the lesson or clinic next. So don't worry yet, just watch some other people go first, and then I'll call on you randomly. And I'm randomly calling on people, so the spontaneity is there.
Perfect. I like it. Makes us
All right.
pay attention more. I like it.
That's kind of what I'm going for. So we like kind of key in and then go from there.
Perfect.
Okay, so I'm going to set up another example and what I would do, and then we'll kind of branch off. Jenny, I'm keying in on you, so I'll set up this example, and then we'll see where you go from there, if that's okay with you. So
You got it?
now we're going in more into clinic leading, and we're going to go intro to black bumps. So we've got some other instructors here. We're going with 2 other instructors. One is a little bit more on that higher end, and one is a little bit more like, I'm going for this intro to black bumps. I've got this idea because this actually happened to me. So we're going to try and tie in 2 different motivations. We got someone who's ripping, more looking to go into that double black bump range, but this is intro to black bumps. And then we also have the person that's coming in, wants to get more comfortable with it. So skier A, skier B. Skier A, more on that high end. Skier B, more on that, I need this as like a lesson going into it. So what I might do is do like a test run on a blue bump run. And just to get their familiarization for that warm-up run. And I can clearly see one's a little bit ripping and the other one's working their way through it. So what I might do is work on a little bit more of a steepish pitch, blue groomed, just to start, and do a couple pivot slips, emphasizing on, I would probably do retraction pivot slips, because what I want to work on here is seeing that ability of the flexing and extending and our ability to rotate. So I want to tie in some pressure movements here and our rotation movements, because I think that's going to be a good precursor as we go into the moguls. So pressure, we got ankles, knees, and hips, and then our rotation, and I think that's going to all come together in that retraction pivot slip. Even as like a hot shot bump ski, am I still there? Cool, okay. So everyone can work on these fundamentals. We can highlight a little bit more. We can bring it onto a steeper groomed face before we jump into the moguls. But everyone can work on these fundamentals always. No matter how good you are, it always helps with those retraction pivot slips. So that can work on timing and our rotational movements. So just brought them onto that steeper blue face for some retraction pivot slips. And Jenny, where would you go with that for an intro to black bumps?
Okay, so because we have skier A who is on the higher end and skier B is more being introduced to it or needing it as a lesson, I would go with instructor A being able to demonstrate to skier B, do some reciprocal teaching here, and have skier B see if those pivot slips, especially retraction pivot slips, when the retraction, the timing of it, when is the retraction happening, and seeing if then they can duplicate that so that skier B can identify exactly where the retraction is coming when they are retracting. And with them being able to see it. And skier B can also be able to point out body part specific, where is the flexion and the extension happening more? Is it happening more in the hips? Is it happening more in the knees? Is it happening more in the ankles? Or is it happening progressively together? That's where I'd go with that. That's how I'd modify that. I would change the timing of it. Okay.
I kind of missed the first skier A part, but I liked the reciprocal teaching because my internet cut out. I'm so sorry about that. But the reciprocal teaching, I love it. Gives a chance to watch that skier and go from there. I think that's what you were saying.
Well, it's not just watch them, but able to identify and then be able to do it back. You know, so they can, right? So they can both benefit from it. A, doing it so that he is intentionally knowing where he's retracting or where he's flexing more. If he's intentionally doing it more in the waist, so that they can see how that pressure control works with the reference alignments of the joints being, I'm losing my words, but progressively or coming together and showing where the center of mass or the center falls when one joint is more proportionately flexed than the others.
Okay.
So, Jenny, are you in changing that task and doing the reciprocal learning, are you focused on changing the students' understanding of movements in the turn shape, or are you trying to facilitate more their understanding about biomechanics?
It would be their understanding of the biomechanics, because these are both instructors, and there's a different, obviously A has a higher understanding of it, maybe or maybe not, is able to physically do it better. And I'd like for that one, for A, to be able to have a higher, not just understanding, but application of the biomechanics, so that skier B can just get the base knowledge or base understanding of the biomechanics when it comes to pressure control and flexion and extension.
Cool.
I love it. So skier B is working a little bit more on like the physical part, and then skier A is working more on that like cognitive, how to make this even more ripping. Way
Absolutely.
to tie in both motivations. I love it. This is super cool, at least for me. You guys might hate it. I don't know. But anyway, so let's go back to Bobby one more time, because I want to make sure he presents again before he leaves. Bobby, where would you take skier A and B from there? You're also muted.
I did kind of lose track for a second, so pass.
Even though I specifically said Bobby cannot pass.
No. You didn't catch the ground rules at the beginning. Bobby's not allowed to pass.
Yeah, but I didn't catch what was said, so it's very difficult to go off of nothing.
Okay, skier A, skier B, in intro to black.
I have the
bums.
worst
Where would
ADD
you
on the
bring
face
them?
of this planet, and it's readily apparent right now.
I can give you a summary, Bobby.
Colleen, if you feel comfortable, where would you bring the group?
Colleen Blanton to the
Go
Do I have to
Colleen.
go off of Jenny, or do I get to go off of what you said? Clarification.
I'm envisioning this kind of going from me to Jenny to you, but
Okay,
if you
so
would
where
like
I
to
would
take it in a
take
different
Jenny's
direction, yeah.
Okay.
But if you want to start scratch, that's okay too.
Sorry, I just need to gather my thoughts.
All good.
Since Jenny changed the timing, maybe I would, once we were successful in, Jenny, were you doing this, what you were doing in Black Bumps? Is that where you were at? Where was your location?
No, we were still on a smooth, a groomed blue, steepish blue pitch.
So maybe once it was
we can do retraction, we can do those retraction, the timing of it. We take the fear of the terrain out.
I think that's awesome. So maybe that's where I would go next, is if we felt confident and once we were successful in the terrain that Jenny had them, and with that timing, maybe we go to another area and we change the terrain. So we go to some easy, maybe back to the blue bumps that we started on in the morning that you had them on, Andrew, because they're already confident with that terrain. They've been there, they know it. And try and take this task into some different terrain, so we can work towards those black bumps. Because that's going to change their, like, as we move through to this associative phase, it's going to bring them back down. Cognitive associative. But it's going to bring them back down in the, like, where they are mentally as we change the terrain.
Right, and then, sorry, because you didn't catch the beginning, but what task would you do if it's, you're bringing them into bumps? I love it. So would you focus on a certain task, or so pick and
do I
choose
have
and
to
vary
keep
a
your
task? No, you can totally
Oh.
change it. What I'm looking for, I'll kind of start at the beginning again, is
Sorry, is the pressure and rotation that you were focused on my focus, but I choose the task?
sure, you can vary the task how you see fit. So
Okay.
you decided to bring them into a different environment. I love it. And then, so which task would you do, or variation of a task? And then what ski fundamental is this going to be focusing on?
Well, if I'm building off of what you guys are building, I feel like I should probably stick to the same things. Just to
bring them into the bumps.
clinic.
I loved it. What would you do in the bumps?
Jenny, you were doing retraction turns on the blue, is that right?
Yes, retraction pivot slips on groomed blue, steepish blue terrain.
Maybe I would, instead of doing like a pivot slip, I would do like, this might not even be a thing, like a retraction to a hockey, to a stop on the top of the bump. Does that
Kind of like a straight run to a stop?
sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it sounds like you're saying a retraction to an edge set.
Yeah.
No, I'm mostly like, I would want to work on that retraction, but I would want the retraction to happen and finish it on a bump.
So you would want the edge set to happen on the bump, and you would be using retraction movements to make that happen?
You could be, since Andrew wanted to focus on pressure and rotary, I think that the, since it's still kind of like a hockey slide to a stop, it's still a rotary piece. And then you're more than edging, I'm not going to go there. The pressure, which foot you really have to be pressuring as you're retracting onto the top of the bump to stop. Does that make sense?
Cool.
This is that emphasizing that stall out that we like to feel, that extra given second where we bring ourselves back.
Where we actually bring our legs up underneath us, right?
Yes.
Like we actually have to feel that. Like there's a balance piece or a pressure piece to be able to slide to a stop on the top of the bump, and also you're pulling your legs up.
Yeah, I like that. That makes sense to me.
Underneath you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I would do that on blue terrain until we felt more comfortable, and then I would throw it to whoever Andrew's going to throw it to next.
Yeah.
I can do it.
Okay. Jump right in there. And then again, just like it's a 3 to 5 minute little presentation. What task are you doing? How is this going to relate to a ski fundamental? And
sorry, I totally
time
just was building
motivation.
up the Jenny's thing.
All good.
Got
I
it.
loved it. Thank you for jumping in.
I understand.
And yeah, just what is this going to do for their skiing? How does it tie into their motivations? All in like that little 3 to 5 minutes. Bobby, where are we bringing skier A and B?
I just want to say that Jen is probably sitting there really fired up because nobody's saying most flex at edge change and everyone's saying retraction.
Oh, I have a whole series of questions to ask about this. I'm just muting myself so I'm not tempted.
So,
I only said retraction because Andrew said retraction.
So it's Jen's like gonna lecture all of us on most flex at edge chain.
Sometimes semantics can get in the way. I'm not actually as hung up on that as I am. Never mind. I won't even go there. Go ahead.
So if I'm going along the same lines of what's already been said, and tying this to a fundamental, right? So we do that retraction movement when we're in the bumps to bring our skis back underneath us so that we can continue moving down the hill. And in order to do that, if I was again tying it to a retraction turn, I'd want to go more so like, can you do a falling leaf while you are most flexed? So that you can practice kind of feeling that sort of kinesthetic or that sensation of moving the ski or moving your center of mass or moving along the length of the ski and down the hill by controlling where pressure or where the pivot point is on the ski fore and aft. So for me, like if I was going to go retraction turn, I'd go fore and aft after that. So that say if they were on the bump, they can move into the next turn while their feet were still underneath them. Stop writing, Jen. Then in terms of how I think that would affect their whole skiing, I think that if you're actively working on a movement in which you need to practice retraction turns, you're probably a little bit inside or back at the end of your turns. And I think that if you're focused on actively, or if you're trying to move into the next turn by focusing on your fore and aft while your feet are underneath you, I think that's going to keep you at a more balanced position throughout each phase of the turn and give you more more range of motion during transition so that you're actively prepared for what comes next. If that makes any sense. Chris has wide eyes.
And
he's muted.
And what's this going to do for their skiing in the bumps?
My request is say it again with fewer words.
Just work on 4 aft so that you can move through each phase of the turn.
Cool.
Falling leaf.
It sounded like that you're moving 4 aft with the intention of manipulating a pivot point.
Sure. Yeah.
Cool.
Or maybe not pivot point, but so that you're
not backing inside in the turn, like you just said.
Yes. So you're not falling back into the same habit that forced you to practice retraction turns at the beginning.
And I would say that what you're really coming down to there is trying to get the students, both the high level and the low level one, to understand torque, to understand the distance between the pivot and the lever, and so that's if you can get their understanding of that, then they can start to manipulate it based on the terrain, based on the task, and all of that. But it all comes down to like that basic principle.
Sure. I mean, I'm the worst person to ask when it comes to how I would describe certain things to students, because I'm very much of a certain mindset that I won't get into. But I'm just like, hey,
that's where the juicy stuff
no,
is.
No, I'm not trying to inspire another hour of conversation that will get us off topic.
And that's why I was trying to restrict this to 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah. So for me, it's just more about moving your center mat or moving along the length of the ski and down the hill. And in order to do that, affecting 4 aft while our skis are underneath us in our retraction turn.
I like that one better. It's a little bit cleaner and simpler.
Yeah, that was way better, that last one.
I wonder whether it's, given that we've got 2 different skiers, different motivations, different levels of comfort in the bumps as well, whether as we keep teasing this out, we could maybe change the outcome, the desired outcome slightly for each one as well. I'm thinking about Colleen's example and sort of finishing on that edge set, given that this is supposed to be about rotary and pressure. If we could challenge, if we can say to skier B.
I never said the word edge set. Clarifying.
Okay. Sorry, I got that from
somewhere. I threw those words in. I stayed
let's
away
put it this way. Fair enough. But let's say, challenge each of them to finish with adequate rotational separation. So when they come on that bump, they're steering the skis back up underneath them. So to skier B, can you do that? Can you get your legs back up underneath you and be directing pressure towards that downhill ski? And for skier A, can you do all of that while, say, lifting the uphill ski to really hammer it home?
Okay. That was a simple version. I liked it a lot. Thank you. So I envisioned myself doing this for about 30 minutes, and we're coming up on that mark. I just thank you guys for putting up with that and my idea. I was hoping to get more participation going with this. We can keep going if you would like different scenarios, but I was going to call it there for just a minute and kind of assess this format and see if Jen had anything to say with this. But thank you guys for putting up with that and playing along with me. I hope it is inspiring more to get more participation.
No, this is good participation. This is a good format. And I think we can tighten up the parameters, which kind of ups the ante yet again. And what I mean by that is, I want to ask you guys just a couple questions real quick, just to create a little bit of clarity. What's the difference between teaching a task and teaching a fundamental?
I think it has to do with facilitating the understanding of why a certain task is performed. So it's understanding versus tactics in my mind.
Yeah, task highlights the fundamental.
So it's more theoretical approach to a practical problem.
And I think to understand how to do a task, you need to set the understandings of Like, you can't have B without A. Like, in order to teach a task, you need to have first taught the fundamentals so they have a baseline or an understanding of why they're doing what they're doing.
Do you have to teach a task? Do you have to, keeping those two things in mind, do you have to actually teach the task?
I think it would be nice application. I think it would be like, so for me, it can go both ways. I mean, you can do a task without understanding why or how it's done, as long as you have a certain skill set and movement pattern. I think the inverse of that is if you have an understanding of a task or a certain movement pattern, I mean, it's nice to kind of cement it or give something to anchor off of, in terms of, for me, very like a kinesthetic sensation.
So in other words, do you have to say to your listener, we're going to do a pivot slip, and I need to describe to you first, or kind of give you an idea of what a pivot slip is?
No, because then you're not, then that kind of takes away like the discovery piece, right? Like, you can guide them into figuring out how to do the guided discovery piece, because you could guide them into figuring out how to do the task themselves without ever giving them the answer before you.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, I personally don't. I try and, contrary to what, like, how I've demonstrated everything or how I've said everything leading up to for the past 45 minutes, I try and say as little as possible while also facilitating an experience for somebody to learn on their own or to experience something different. Because I think that as long as you, if you can help the light bulb go off in their own head, then I think that's what's ultimately the most successful.
Okay.
I think it comes down to the student, whether it's an instructor or just a client. If I say pivot slip to you guys, you know what that means. Then I can bring it into something else, like a more cognitive piece of, let's do whatever, or a traction pivot slip. And you guys would be able to figure that out. Whereas if I taught like a client, hey, we're gonna do pivot slips, they have no idea what I'm talking about. So then we're just going more for that physical piece. I would want to show them, describe it, visual, audio, and kinesthetic. Get all those bases covered, and then we could bring it into why we're doing it.
I feel like you're right with the client. You need a why with the.
Do you even need to name it? Do you really even need?
Question.
Do you really even need to name it? Do you need to call it anything with a client, with a guest?
No.
No, but you do need to show something. I mean, you can't.
Well, I'm not saying you don't show anything. I'm not saying you don't introduce anything, and I'm not saying you don't give information. And the reason I'm going here is, when I hear you guys talk, and especially as you talk as trainers, when you say, well, we're going to do a pivot slip, it's like you're going to have to go so far past that point when you're talking with this group. In other words, it's not about the pivot slip. It's not about the task, because you can do a pivot slip for how many different reasons and in how many different ways? Like a gazillion.
Right.
Does that make sense, you guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things I want to suggest is, I mean, yeah, if you looked at your audience and if it was an instructor, you might say, just for the framework of a pivot slip, and then hopefully immediately they would be asking why. What are we focusing on? Whereas with a guest, I mean, you don't even need to use the words. You just go right to what you're focusing on. Does that make sense, you guys?
Or less talking, more skiing with the guest.
Well, that's a different premise. That this said, the reason I'm going here is, who was it brought up pivot slips? I kind of had some questions and some notes going on here to set up this next one. To set up the next scenario, Andrew, as we continue on, there's a couple of things. Number one, at this level, you guys, always, unless you specifically say I'm working with a level 1 or level 2 instructor, and maybe even with a level 2, but with this group going forward, always speak to 2 skills, minimum of 2 skills. Okay, and the relationship of those 2 skills. So for example, Bobby, when you were saying, I'm concerned about somebody who may be this, the lesser experienced instructor B, who has a tendency to get a little bit back inside because they get a little bit defensive when they get in the bumps. And therefore this pivot slip scenario that we're talking about, you know, regardless of whether it has a retraction or not, you're saying, I'm going to be focusing on their fore-aft. And what's going through my mind is, if you're talking about when they're on the bump, which tends to represent the finish into initiation, which if they have good rotational separation, fore-aft to their body is not the same as fore-aft to their skis. And you're going to have to be really clear about how those two skills and those two planes of motion come together when in a pivot slip setting, because that's what you're focusing on, not a pivot slip.
So you're saying I was misguided in my plane of motion, that I should have been focused more on foot to foot as opposed to fore aft.
No, I'm saying that you were oversimplified. You were grossly oversimplifying it. Well, yeah, we're just going to work this on our fore aft, and I'm going, oh really? Because if this were in a training setting, I'd be going, okay, don't hold on, not so fast. Come back here now. Demonstrate for me and lead this group through exactly how the biomechanics of the body mechanics and relative to the ski performance of how in that phase from shaping or from finish to initiation over the top of a bump, how they're refining their fore aft relative to their rotary, because it's got to have a two skill. Right? Does that make sense?
I see.
So it's not that it needs more level of complexity, it needs more level of specificity. Uh-oh, Bobby froze.
Yeah, my internet's going a little shaky as well.
Say again,
and that's
Andrew?
kind of why I wanted to. My internet is a little shaky as well. That's why I was kind of cutting myself to 30 minutes in case my internet started going all over the place.
Oh, Bobby's
and I
back.
know there's a lot
Bobby,
of,
did that make sense how I was changing the parameters and tightening them up there? And that, you guys, when you look at the RMT program guide and it talks about you need to be able to talk about multiple skills in multiple phases at all time, in your parentheses after that, you need to say to yourself, at all times. Now, you filter that depending on your audience, but even with this crew, when you're talking about how you're working with a guest, have that level of technical specificity, because that's what exemplifies your mastery of the content, that you can be simple and straightforward. And Vazella, I'm really going to challenge you there. Don't go into these long technical principles of, well, we're really teaching them torque. And it's like, don't even go there right now. Don't even go there. Because I'm going, I don't even know what the hell you're talking about when you go there. I really am. It's like, what I'm really trying to get them to understand is that in a pivot slip, whether I'm extending or releasing to release the skis, that my skis are going one way, my body's going the other if I have rotational separation. And how I move across the skis is the same kind of to some degree as how we are directing pressure from ski to ski. And yeah, there can be a fore aft component to it too, but I got to talk about how I'm moving differently. Does that make sense, you guys? However it is you're addressing it, be that specific. So now, Andrew, take us to the next level with those narrowed parameters.
Okay, so hopefully my internet's holding up, and
good.
yeah, just going with the next scenario of just trying to tie in two skills with our new parameters. Let's try and go how the skills relate, and just for one specific task. And then, so you're going to vary the task, and what two skills is it going to work on? Hopefully that'll be a little cleaner. So we're going to go into the end goal for our skier A and skier B now in this new scenario is short performance turns. We're looking to clean those up, make them more uniform and more performance based. So short performance turns for skier A, skier B in our clinic leading. What I'd want to work on with these guys is, let's start with, I would want to go that foot to foot pressure and edging skills. So what I want to bring them into to challenge them a little bit is go for a skating drill, but it's going to be a modification of a skating drill. It's going to be a railroad track skating. So skate onto the new ski, go outside edge, inside edge, and then push off. So then you're going to go into the next ski, inside edge, inside edge, push off. So it's a little bit of a railroad track / skating drill. Does that make sense, Colleen? What can I do?
What's your terrain choice?
This is going to be green terrain choice, and just something easy, nothing crazy, because I want to get the emphasis of the tipping movements for edging and redirecting our pressure to go from outside ski to outside ski. So these two are going to relate, because you need to be, if you're on your outside ski, you have your center of mass directed over it, it's going to make it way easier to tip your ski if you're aligned with it. So that's how my edging movements and my foot-to-foot movements are complementing each other. If you're over the outside ski, it's a lot easier to tip your leg. So I'm going to start them off with this drill in an effort to hone our foot-to-foot and edging drills to make a more cleaner short performance turn is our end goal. So Dom, where would you go with that?
So if we're talking about, just to back up a section, if we're talking about performance shorts per that task's IDP, we need to tip first, then twist. So presumably, certainly skier B and probably also skier A to some extent is twisting to an edge. So I just want to put that out there sort of for them as like why we're doing this task, to work on those edging movements first. I would actually just try to stay with this task, maybe modify it by doing two things. Seeing if to really focus on, as you were just talking about, getting on that new little toe edge and establishing pressure over it. I would challenge them first before they push off. Can they stay on that new outside ski edge longer? Maybe to like a 5-second count. Okay. Can they really demonstrate the ability, as you were saying, to direct the pressure over that outside ski to that level? And you said we were on green terrain. So if we were on sort of flattish green terrain, once they were able to do that a little bit better, I would try to up the ante a bit by taking it on some, say, steeper blue terrain. And obviously I wouldn't want them to be pointing their skis down the hill at that point. So I would try to have them, again, first establish going across the hill on that new downhill outside ski edge, downhill toe. And then maybe just to take it even further after they got better at that, try doing some, I don't know, outside ski turns, for example.
Let's hold it again, there because I want to have people branch off, if that's okay with you.
Cool.
So just like, again, yeah, that 3 to 5 minutes, what new task? It could be a totally new task if you want to bring it into a different direction. But our end goal, thank you, Dom, that was awesome. I liked it. I like where you're going. It really worked off of that current task.
Thanks. And just to add, you can sort of tell my bias right now, at least what I'm trying to challenge myself to do is work on modifying tasks,
yes,
as opposed to necessarily going to another task. Because I know just from my own experience with the Cert 3 exam, the teach specifically, the first time I took it, when I went down in flames, I was under the misimpression that the goal was to try to have them do as many IDP tasks as possible. And when I finally had success, it was about picking a task and modifying it accordingly.
And that's one of my goals for this, is to either vary the same task to death, like as many ways as possible, or have the creativity to go branch into a new task. I'm fine with either one, but the ability to brainstorm and switch tasks or switch variations is one of my goals for this. So off of that note of holding that outside edge a little bit longer, Bobby, are you raising your hand?
I am, because I'm going to get going. And I just wanted to let you know so I don't just Irish goodbye a bunch of sober people.
So you're not presenting. Gotcha.
I've been picked on enough.
That was my ultimate goal behind all of this, was to make you talk, and that was achieved. So thank you for putting up with that.
That's the outcome you didn't mention.
Yep, that was my
Andrew comes and plays board games at my house every Tuesday, so I'll be sure to give him grief.
Game night.
Eat him.
Toodaloo.
Toodles.
Thanks, Bobby.
Yeah.
Okay, so working off of what Dom was saying, Donnie, I'm going to throw it back to you. So our goal is short performance turns, more control over them so we get uniform shape. We went that skating drill. Dom emphasized more of it, holding that edge a little bit longer, and then maybe even changing the terrain a little bit. So what would you're muted as well.
I was thinking your skating drill was probably done on mellower terrain.
Yes.
So I wanted to take it, stay on that mellower terrain just a little bit and do some crab walks. You know, with short turns, we want to get that rebound out of the skis, and skating isn't going to do a whole lot of that. So with the crab walk, getting it out there, setting it down, with a little, get some speed to do it too, starting out on flatter terrain, skating to get going, and then put it down there, get that ski to be loaded and bent, and then come back underneath of you, and then just get that going.
And which two ski fundamentals would this work on for you?
The foot to foot, it goes to that again, and then as we're refining our edging skills, so that as we're doing a crab walk, and the ski's coming back underneath of you, you've got to be shortening your leg as it gets flatter. So having your most flexed edge change, it'll work on that in your edging.
Cool. So foot to foot and edging skills.
Yeah.
Relating. Jenny is raising her hands. Thank you, Donnie.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so to stick with the skills, and I think we're sticking with the skills on foot to foot and edging in that skating task that you started with, Andrew. I would totally take this to and change the task so that they're getting the idea that they're tipping first before twisting, or tipping before turning. We do like a skate, skate, turn, skate, skate, turn. So
you're muted.
Muted.
You're muted.
Oh, it's frozen. Jenny, you're muted.
Jenny.
I was doing so good.
It was perfect. I loved it.
Turn, and then you muted yourself. So you can.
Because I took my hand off the thing.
Do it again.
Okay. So I would I was doing so good. You guys gotta believe me on that one. It was excellent.
That's beautiful.
6s across the board. I loved it.
So I would take that initial task of the skating task, going from outside edge to outside edge, to a skate, skate, turn, so that they have the sensation of being on that new edge earlier in the turn. So this is still speaking to the foot to foot, because they're literally, when they do the skate, they have to step off of it and be on it earlier at the initiation of the turn, and then bring it into the turn. So it'd be a skate, skate, turn, skate, skate, turn.
Sweet. So sticking with foot to foot and the edging. I like it.
Sticking with
I
foot to
like
foot
that
and edging.
variation as well.
And really working on that initiation phase of the turn, feeling that they're moving, they're directing pressure towards the new outside earlier in the turn, and also on that edge.
Nice. Thank you. Yeah. Colleen, what can we do?
I'd make it a little harder once we're great at what Jenny just said. And at the end of the skate turn, once you make the turn, I would have them do a one-legged railroad track, like a name for this. It's like a fake turn. I forget the name of it. But where they have to, so after they make a turn, say they're turning to the left, they've just finished a left-handed turn, then they would pick up their right ski and they would have to tip their ski down the hill.
Like a white pass?
Up the hill and then back down the hill and start the next turn. Kind of like, well, they wouldn't even have to do the turn yet, but just practice the getting on that outside ski and getting on that new outside edge. So it wouldn't even be a turn. It would just be kind of like a diagonal across the hill if you looked up for traffic, like a one-legged railroad track.
Okay.
Sense?
I got what you're saying now.
So it would be working on, so moving from Jenny's, it would work on foot to foot because you'd have to go from that, what was that, you just finished a left-handed turn, what was that right ski onto that left ski and then do the tipping. And then you could make another, then you could do the skate and go the other direction and tie that in. Does that make sense?
Sort of. So you're going across the hill. And
like if we did the skate and turned to the left.
Okay, and then go all the way across the hill on one ski.
And then once I did that skate turn to the left, then I would pick my right foot up and I would have to do a railroad track on my left foot.
Okay. Now I got it.
And then I would go the other direction. But then I would have done a transfer of foot to foot and I would have done my edging. Does that make sense? To try and tie it in so it was more to the timing piece, because I feel like no one's really talked about where in the turn we're working on this necessarily. And so that would help us with the timing of when we wanted to do what we wanted to do.
Jenny did mention that she was working on like getting to that outside, to the new edge earlier.
Right. But that's still like.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of this is imagination based.
Oh, right. Yeah, I was just trying to like go with what she said, but.
Gotcha.
Specify.
One other question for you. What type of terrain would you put us on for that?
I'd probably keep us on very similar terrain because that's a big challenge and you don't want something super steep because that's really scary to try and get on a 1 foot and.
So I have a question. Would this be changing accuracy? This is for Jen. Would this, the way we're changing or modifying these tasks, would be changing for accuracy since we're not changing speed or terrain?
Well, it's not like you're
so.
not completely changing speed because, of course, if you start to take it into turns, you're probably going to gain a little bit more speed. But yeah, it's more accuracy. You know, accuracy is if you're asking someone to, if you're changing the task in a way that makes them refine just specifically how they're moving. So for example, Andrew, right at the beginning, when you said I would take skating, but I would modify it so that they have to do an edge change on one ski, you know, that they're in their skating where they're starting off on the little toe edge, that they've got to roll it over to the big toe edge, you know, back to the little toe edge and back to the big toe edge. That's actually a modification that in order for them to be successful, it requires that they have a higher degree of precision. So that's a modification along the lines of, certainly not just, and precision, accuracy has 2 points. It has precision and versatility. So that's the precision piece of it. Yeah.
Cool. And then I'm going to change, like, we're going to throw this to one other person. Chris, it's coming to you. And then after that, I think we're good for a minute and either change scenario or debrief. But let's do one more. Chris, if you're good with that, where would we go after Colleen's teach?
I mean, I felt like that was pretty exhaustive of taking a skate thing and then turning it up.
Do you want to bring a whole picture and go into like short performance? I don't know. So we could
you could
do
have
it right there if you want.
You could have like a moment where someone's doing the skate and then bring it into an outside or a reverse javelin turn. Do something like that. Skate, skate, reverse javelin, skate, skate, reverse javelin.
Almost sounds like a baloo, just constantly changing the difficulty with and off of it.
But
if you feel like we've exhausted this, then I'm good with it. I just wanted to have you talk if you wanted to again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would just be one other variation. I like both Jenny and Colleen's variations to skating.
Okay, so Andrew, I have a question, kind of going back to how when you first set this up, and you because you were saying in the context of, or kind of relative to a short radius performance turn, working on skating. And what's coming to my mind is why, in other words, what is it about somebody's short radius turn, and these could be level 2 or level 3 instructors, what is it about somebody's short radius turn that would take you into the skating realm and edging to ski pressure to begin with?
So what I envisioned for that is the control piece. Kind of what Jenny was mentioning is getting onto that edge earlier in the turn. For short performance, it's, for our imagination's sake, it's a lot of edging movements and foot-to-foot movements. Quick, rapid fire of that. And so what I was envisioning was the ability to stay over that outside ski with that skating drill is going to give us more control of those edging movements to tip and untip when we want.
Okay.
And that's vitally important for our short performance so that we can get on it earlier and maintain it throughout the turn.
Okay, I'm going to back you up a little bit. I'm going to go back to your original outcomes, and one of those outcomes was being versatile with the well-versed as well as versatile with the IDP. And another of the outcomes I think that you shared here, at least I know that you and I shared, had to do with using skier analysis as the framework for, or the rationale for, why we are then choosing the fundamentals that needed to be developed within a certain phases or location of the turn, and that then determines the task that we chose. Does that make sense? So if I was going to go back and even ask you a higher level of specificity when you say, well, you know, it has to do with their edging and their ski to ski and getting on the ski earlier, and it's like, okay, so hold on. What is it about their current performance? Can you describe, can you make something in your mind? Can you find something, you know, in your mind's eye that they're currently doing that needs to be addressed?
For a lot of the skiers that I do typically see, is, including myself, is they're not able to, their turns come out to more of a comma. So there's a lot of rotary based at the start of the turn. That's just the example that's coming to mind. And what I'd want, personal skiing, is edging before that rotary aspect. So I want to focus on that ski to ski pressure, get on there so that I'm able to tip my ski earlier in the turn, and it starts to shape the turn earlier. And then it gets more of that uniform shape that we're looking for, not so much of that like comma shape, the washing out at the top and then cutting across.
Good. And so now I would come back and I would just, go ahead. Go ahead, I cut you off.
All good. To direct pressure to that outside ski, it's going to enable me. So if I get onto that outside ski earlier, I can have the ability to tip my skis earlier as well, which will help shape my turn before that rotary aspect. I want that to be last in my personal skiing.
Okay, good. And it is fair game, especially at RMT. I know that there's there tends to be a little narrower parameters at level 3 that, you know, stay with 2 skills. You can go from skill to skill as long as we call it signaling for lane change. In other words, you could say, hey, the tendency that I'm seeing is this comma-shaped turn where the ski is twisted before it's tipped, and therefore I'm going to focus on pressure control to edging. But what I would do is create the same rationale there. In other words, something that we see in a lot of even really high-end skiers, even ourselves, is a tendency to fall off the ski at the beginning of the turn. In other words, we get the ski tipped before we get it pressured. And if we get the ski tipped before we get it pressured, there quite often tends to be a twisting of the ski that's going on early in the turn as well. So in order to fix the rotary to edging refinement, actually going to go in a direction of ski to edging, and getting the skier to get that understanding of aligning their center of mass over and moving with the new outside ski. And the way they move to do that is going to allow them to have that mobility of tipping the ski underneath them. See, you see how I'm taking, here's this pattern. There's this skill to skill relationship and this other skill to skill relationship, and they're all interrelated. And so we're going to go with these 2 skills, ski to ski and edging. And because it's this type of a body performance in this phase of the turn, now skating is so logical. It's so logical in how you're approaching it, why you're approaching it, how you're developing it. And what it does is it allows you guys to take a kind of an overall structure and how you're putting this together of going from whole to parts to whole. We'll start with the whole. This is where we're starting with. That was less than ideal, could have been more ideal. I'm pulling these parts out. I'm digressing them down into this task, and now we're really clear about why we're working on this task, how we're working on this task, how we're going to progress it back into the whole. Does that make sense?
You're like setting up your logic to someone that isn't inside your brain.
Yep.
And that's what I'm taking away from this meeting, is setting these parameters and how I want it, because it makes sense in my head. I had no idea how this was going to come out. But thank you guys again for playing along with this and kind of going. I hope it was inspiring more like participation and a little bit of brainstorming about this.
It's fun to get creative in like a safe space.
That, yeah, my goal is to create those variations and branch off of it, and then Jen's there to make sure my idea doesn't get too crazy.
Andrew, this was an excellent exercise for 2 reasons. Number one, this is what you're going to have to do if you haven't done your MA on snow. It is totally what you're going to have to do. And that ability to like spontaneously go, this is not going the direction I want to because of this logic. I need to change lanes, or I need to change tasks or something. This is exactly what you're going to need to do and be able to defend that in this way. And then the other thing is on the clinic leading side, when we have to do the peer coaching, this is exactly what we're going to be doing.
And you really kept us on task, even though I only came the last like 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you. And then we've got about, like 15 minutes, so we could just kind of debrief or whatever, set up for next week, whatever. Jen, if you had any comments as well, or if you guys wanted pure feedback, or I don't know. Just thank you again.
What do you guys want with the next 15 minutes? Actually, it's 12 minutes. What would you like with that time? Oh, y'all.
I'd love to like kind of plan for when the next meeting's going to be, and then maybe get some feedback.
Okay. So you guys want to do 1 week or 2 weeks?
Maybe 2 weeks, and I'm going to have work starting up soon. So I don't know how many more Fridays I'm going to be able to do. That'll come with time, but.
Could we do like a weekday?
Mm-hmm.
In it?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be Friday. I don't know how we landed on Friday, but at any rate, it does not have to be Friday.
I think the morning for people, we just switched to the afternoon.
Wednesdays are about my only day that I don't have something going on. Matter of fact, I have to hop off this call here in a minute and join another one. But Wednesdays, for some reason, except for the 17th, I am, well, actually, I'm completely open. So if Wednesdays work better for other people.
Sure,
I'm
for now.
for the 8th, but I can work around that.
Stay with 4 p.m.
That I can make that work.
I mean,
That's probably the early.
yeah, I would have to, because I have a Alpine Committee workshop all morning from like 8 to 10 or 11. And then I'm trying to squeeze in. Wednesday has always been typically my Wednesday bike ride group for like 20 years. And so I can either, if I do go ride, it's like right at 6. So I have to be really good with my time. I got to make sure I'm finishing up promptly at 5:30. But I could do that.
That will probably be helpful for our time management skills.
Okay.
We all can.
Okay.
If you need to be done at 6 or you need to be done at 5:30.
I meet them at 6. So if I'm off at
Okay.
5:30, then that's just enough time to change clothes, grab all my gear, and drive to where I'm meeting them. Cool. So Wednesday, Tuesday works too. But Jenny, you said Wednesdays were better for you in terms of having time.
In general, I'm not, it's the only one that I don't have just completely booked up, except for, I want to say the 17th, which might be next Wednesday.
It is next Wednesday.
Okay, I have a, well, but if we're done by 5:30, because Jen has to, that's fine, because I have a board meeting that starts at 6, so okay. We're good.
Okay.
And do you guys want to go next Wednesday 4 p.m. or you want to take a week off?
I'm cool with either.
I don't know. Yeah.
Let's say
well,
I can do Wednesdays, just not next Wednesday, the 17th.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's take next Wednesday off, and then we'll go Wednesdays after that, and kind of decide week by week. I'm kind of
focus going to be.
Well, so we can go back and forth. I mean, we can go back to an MA focus again next week, if you guys want, or we can stay. The cool thing about what we're doing here is, this is setting you up for either technical and movement analysis or clinic leading. Because, as I'm looking here, I'm kind of taking some notes about if being able to come up with an outcome quickly based on how you're going to take the real to the ideal, which requires a brief technical analysis, and then choosing moving from whole to parts to whole. And it doesn't always have to be something out of the IDP. But if you do choose something out of the IDP, it needs to be customized relative to the outcome that you set up, and being able to talk very quickly about how you would step into a task, how you would set it up, what skills you're working on, what would be the body to ski performance, blah, 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 is something that you're going to have to do for both the MA, as Jenny was talking about, as well as clinic leading. I mean, that is clinic leading. And if thinking about, if you go into this peer group thinking you're going to have a whole bunch of things, already lined up, it's like, it has to be spontaneous. It has to be in the moment. It has to be based on what you're seeing the group do. And you may be only presenting back to your peers a 10 to 20 minute scenario, but the reality is, if you can start thinking in 20-minute blocks and 20-minute chunks, and that if you're in front of the group for 45 minutes, you're just taking 2 chunks, you're using 2 blocks. And if you start thinking about what it takes to put a 20-minute block together in clinic leading, and at the end of that 20 minutes, you're doing the same thing. You're going back, you're reassessing, where are we? This is my next outcome, boom, right? Does that make sense, you guys? Kind of like you were doing here. I would shift the task this way, or I would choose a new task, or I would take it into whole skiing. You can go whole to parts to whole to parts to whole, back and forth and back and forth. And it would be really fun to use the video of some of the entrance assessment as, you know, as the skiers. In other words, rather than making them up in our head, let's go ahead and actually look at some skiers and have some footage in front of us. This is how I would set it up and run with it. How's that sound?
And that was a really good summary of the day too. Oh,
but that might be some really good prep work where it's requiring you to think on your toes, work as a team. You can do the same thing, pass it back and forth, tag team. We call that add-on tag, you're it. So let's see, here are some notes that I took. Let's see, with Andrew, I think I already came back around and asked you about the specifics and how you were setting up so that you could go from whole to parts to whole. Chris, I'm going to encourage you to know that you can go to varying degrees of complexity and sophistication, or you can back out of it and use very simple, no, not simple, specific language that speaks very clearly to, you know, when I see this body performance and that, you know, I would ask you in the setting that you presented, I would ask you to say more about how rotary creates edging that then moves the body back and forth across the skis, because that did not make sense to me. So you are going to have to be careful about, it's like you're almost trying to take it to a level of sophistication that is going to need more clarification. Does that make sense? You're muted.
Yeah, I just unmuted it. Yeah, I guess I'm going to have to ask you to be a little more specific.
Well, okay, so keeping in mind we got 4 minutes left and I got to get to everybody to give some feedback. When you tell me that rotation is used to direct pressure, you lost me.
I mean, like just showing the foot and
yeah. So in other words, if you're going to use that kind of conclusion, you're going to need to fill in some more biomechanical information. So in other words, because the foot and ankle is a triplanar joint, and because we don't just roll our foot, it actually turns slightly too, but that's only when the foot is unweighted. Keep in mind, when the foot is weighted, that same thing doesn't happen. When it becomes a closed chain, then the less resistance becomes more up in the body. And so what you see what I'm saying? It's like if you're going to go to that degree of biomechanics, you're going to have to be really clear in how you're explaining it.
I mean, does that clarity come from follow-up questions with the audience and then the audience telling me what they don't understand about the conversation?
Not always. Sometimes you're going to have to lay some premise, some framework, because the foot and ankle are a triplanar joint. Because they every time we think of when we think of tipping the foot to the big toe side, it moves in 3 planes. It flexes or it extends. It rotates on a horizontal plane, and it adducts and abducts. It tips. No, at any rate, I'm not.
What part of that though brings clarity to you? Like that's the part that I need to understand.
That you need to set. You need to set. If you're going to go into that level of biomechanics, you need to set a biomechanical framework.
Okay.
I rolled mine last week and it's still blue.
Oh, by the way. Let's see. I think for both Jenny and Colleen, it was more along the lines of when I came back around and I said, when you use a task, talk about 2 skills, bring those 2 skills together, talk about what phases of the turn you're using, and not 2 skills, 2 fundamentals. And make sure that you're speaking to the body, with clarity in the body and the ski performance, because you can't take us through a physical experience. And it doesn't hurt to be able to have that level of specification in your verbal, even though you might not always use that in a clinic setting or in a training or in an educational setting. Okay. Dom, I think you exemplified that well, and Donnie, I think you exemplified that well. Okay. What else? Yeah, you know, simple things like if you call it retraction or not, I don't really care. You know, for Bobby, one of the things I was going to ask him about that I was going to come back to is he said he did a pretty good job, just to share back with you guys because you did listen to it. When he talked about you know, pivot slip to focus on a flattened ski and then show how Andrew, with your prompting, very good for you. You said more specific body performance, and he said I would focus on the ankle and knee tipping that helps to flatten the skis, and then he said, and how to move the center of mass down the hill. And of course, where I was going to come right back around and say is, how exactly do we move our center of mass down the hill? In that setting, in a pivot slip setting, your skis are downhill of your body. So what you're having to do is move your body across your skis. I'd be curious to hear what his explanation at that point would be of how you do that. Because what he's talking about there, anytime you're moving your body across your skis, really what you're talking about is inclination. And what are the mechanics? What are the simple way that you describe to somebody about how they move their center of mass over their skis and then across their skis? Yeah. You know, as a group, I was going to challenge you with some things like, if you were in, and this might be some challenges for going forward, if you were in a training setting and you were telling somebody, here is a regular pivot slip and here is a retraction or flexion at edge change pivot slip, a flexion pivot slip. A fun thing to explore with the group would be, but it would be good to hear you guys talk about this, is what fundamentals change in order for it to be a regular pivot slip or a flexion pivot slip. You know, and no, you don't just get to say your legs flex. You got to talk about the fundamentals. You got to talk about what changes, what doesn't. Okay, so that might be a challenge for the next session. Okay, another challenge for the next session was, in one of the scenarios, Andrew, you set up skating. Donnie took it to crab walk, and where I was dying to go was put them together. Put them together. How could you take skating? Could you see how cool this would be? Part A, skating. Part B, crab walk. Put them together. How would you use skating and crab walk to bring it back into a whole turn? So
could you like skate and then do a crab walk, and that would,
well, you can't just say you get to just do this task and then just do that task. You got to talk about what is the body performance of one, what would have to change in order to bring in the other, and how would that relate back to a whole turn? And specifically, if you could keep it in 2 skills, because you see how that would potentially, what's going in my mind is, you guys get to ruminate on this for a week and bring it back to our next session, is how would that stacking two tasks like that, hybriding 2 tasks, how would that take 2 skills, 2 fundamentals through all the phases of the turn and beautifully, easily walk it back into whole skiing? I'm seeing a couple of you going, oh, and a couple of you going, oh, I'm going to have to work on this. Does that make sense, you guys? Or do you understand the challenge there? I'm not going to let you talk about it yet because it's 5:30. So I'm going to leave you with that. That's like, at the end of the episode when they show you the previews of the next episode.
So we're planning on not next week, but the week following?
Yes.
Okay. Like the last week of July, the last Wednesday of July, the 24th.
Yep. And I think we'll stay with this format. It's a good format, Andrew. Thank you. Let's keep working with it. Let's just have skiers that we're watching that we're working with. We'll have, so we've kind of created or tightened up some parameters as we went. I'll define those and send them out, those out to you, as well as these couple of questions that we'll answer.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Jen.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.
Good session, gang. Happy weekend.
Happy weekend.